The town of Red Rock was half buried in dust that day, the kind of dust that clung to the throat and stung the eyes. Wagons rattled past the saloon, spooking a couple of lean horses tied outside. The sun blazed high and merciless, baking the wood of the boardwalks until they creaked with every step. Inside the general store, the air wasn't much cooler. Shelves were lined with flour, sugar, beans, bolts of cloth, a scatter of tools, and the faint smell of kerosene and leather. The room was quiet except for the shuffle of boots on planks and the rhythmic tick of a wall clock. And then, she entered. Eliza Carter pushed open the door with the slow, deliberate movement of someone measuring each step against exhaustion. She carried no basket, no list. Only a little boy at her side, maybe 5 years old, his hair sun-bleached and his small hand gripping her skirt. The boy's eyes darted hungrily to the shelves of food. The shopkeeper, Mr. Barnes, looked up from behind the counter. His expression faltered when he recognized her. "Eliza," he said softly, as though her name was a burden. She gave a short nod, lips pressed tight. Her dress was clean but worn thin, faded from washing. Her eyes, clear, deep brown, but rimmed with shadows, swept over the loaves of bread stacked near the counter. She reached into her pocket.no coins. Her hand trembled as she pulled something else out instead, a simple gold ring, dull with wear but unmistakably precious. A wedding band. She set it carefully on the counter, the metal catching a flash of light from the window. Mr. Barnes froze. His brow creased. "Ma'am, are you sure?" he asked, glancing at the boy tugging at her dress. Eliza swallowed hard. Her voice cracked but stayed steady enough to be heard. "I need food for my son. Bread. And beans if it'll cover it." Her boy clung to her, whispering, "Mama, I'm hungry." The store fell silent. A couple of women near the fabric section exchanged looks, whispering behind their hands. A cowboy leaning against the doorway spat into a tin and shook his head. It wasn't just pity in their eyes. It was judgment. Because everyone knew Eliza Carter. The widow. Her husband had been a miner, crushed in a cave-in last winter. She'd been scraping by since, sewing when work came, taking in laundry when she could. But now, standing in front of everyone, trading the last token of her marriage for a few mouthfuls of food, this was desperation on full display. And someone else saw it, too. At the far end of the store, leaning against a rack of tools, stood Caleb Rawlins. Tall, broad-shouldered, his hat shadowing a face both weathered and stern, Caleb was the kind of man people noticed even when he tried not to be noticed. His coat was plain but fine, boots polished, and a silver chain of a pocket watch glimmered against his vest. He was known as the richest cattleman in 3 counties. Owner of the Double R Ranch. A man who could have anything money bought, except the one thing that mattered. His wife had died 3 years before, fever taking her in a night. Since then, Caleb Rawlins had walked through life like a ghost wearing skin, tending cattle, buying land, piling up wealth he couldn't spend. He had come into town that morning for supplies. But what he saw now pulled him out of his silence like a gunshot. Eliza's hand lingered on the counter beside the ring, her fingers reluctant to leave it. Caleb's eyes locked on that gold band, and something deep inside him twisted, the echo of a memory. He remembered sliding a ring like that onto a young hand, trembling with hope. He remembered the weight of it when it was returned to him, after his wife's funeral, cold and final. His chest tightened. Mr. Barnes cleared his throat. I reckon I can give you a loaf, maybe some beans. Not the sugar. Ring's worth more, but, it ain't right to take it. Eliza lifted her chin, dignity burning through her shame. Take it. Bread and beans will do. Her voice was steady now, but her boy's wide eyes filled with tears. Caleb's boot heels clicked as he strode forward. The air shifted. Heads turned. Even the whispering women went silent. He reached the counter, his gaze heavy on the ring, then on Eliza. Her eyes met his, startled, defensive, as though bracing for mockery. Instead, he said one word. No. The shopkeeper blinked. Mr. Rollins? Caleb's hand slid into his vest pocket. He laid down more than enough coins to pay for the bread, beans, and sugar, enough to buy out half the shelf if he'd wanted. He pushed them across the counter. You'll give the lady what she asked. And you'll give back her ring. Eliza stiffened. I don't need your charity. Her words were sharp, but her voice trembled at the edges. The boy's eyes darted between them, confused. Caleb studied her, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned slightly closer, his voice low, steady, like gravel rolling in a deep river. It ain't charity, he said. It's a bargain. The room seemed to lean in. Eliza frowned, clutching her son's hand tighter. What kind of bargain? Caleb's eyes held hers. The weight of years of silence, of loss, of buried need, was in his gaze. His voice was clear enough for the whole store to hear when he answered. You'll marry me. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. The women gasped. The cowboy in the doorway nearly choked on his tobacco. Mr. Barnes dropped the scoop he was holding, beans spilling across the counter. Eliza went pale. She stared at him, breath caught, as if he'd spoken madness. Marry you? She whispered. Caleb didn't flinch. I'm a man with land, stock, money enough. But no family. You need a husband. That boy needs a father. So I'll pay for your food, and I'll take back none of it, on one condition. You walk out of this store my wife. The silence that followed was so heavy it rang louder than any gunshot. Eliza's chest rose and fell, her fingers trembling where they gripped her son's shoulder. Her pride warred with fear, survival with dignity. Sir, she said finally, her voice a whisper trembling on the edge of disbelief. You don't even know me. Caleb's eyes softened just enough to reveal a flicker of the man behind the armor. I know enough. The town held its breath. And Eliza, with her son clutching at her skirt and her ring glinting faintly between them, stared at the stranger who had just turned her desperation into an impossible choice. The loaf of bread sat forgotten on the counter. The clock on the wall ticked on, loud in the silence, as though counting down to whatever she would say next. The town of Red Rock had seen its fair share of shotgun weddings, saloon brawls, and dusty funerals. But never had it seen a proposal as sudden, as outrageous, as the one Caleb Rollins dropped in the general store that afternoon. By the time the words, "You'll marry me," had settled into the air, the place had become a hive of whispers. Eliza Carter stood frozen, clutching her son to her side, her heart thundering in her chest. The man in front of her wasn't just any cowboy. He was Caleb Rollins. The richest rancher in the county. A man with more cattle than most men had dreams. A man feared for his temper, respected for his aim, and whispered about for his silence since his wife died. And now he was offering her marriage as if it were a business deal over beans and bread. Eliza's throat tightened. You're mad. Caleb's eyes didn't waver. Maybe. But you won't find a better offer, Mrs. Carter. Not in this town. Not in this life. The storekeeper shifted awkwardly. Mr. Rollins, maybe this ain't the place. It's exactly the place, Caleb cut in, his voice like the snap of a whip. The whole town gossips anyway. Might as well give them something worth their tongues. Gasps and muffled laughter rippled through the onlookers. Eliza's pride flared. I don't need saving. Caleb leaned just close enough that only she could hear, his tone softer now, almost pleading. I ain't offering to save you. I'm offering to stand beside you. Difference is, one leaves you beholden. The other makes you free. His words hit somewhere deep in her chest, though she fought to hide it. Her son, Tommy, tugged at her dress. Mama, is he gonna give us the bread? The whole room exhaled in a half laugh, half groan. Eliza closed her eyes for a moment, shame burning hot in her cheeks. When she opened them again, Caleb's stare was waiting, steady as the earth. And then, with a voice small but clear, she said, "Fine. If you mean it, then I'll marry you." By sundown, half the town had turned out to witness the strangest wedding Red Rock had ever seen. The preacher stood on the steps of the little whitewashed church, his Bible trembling slightly in his hands as he glanced at Caleb and Eliza. "Do you, Caleb Rawlins, take this woman?" "I do." "Do you, Eliza Carter, take this man?" Her throat went dry. The whole town was watching. Some eyes were mocking, some sympathetic, some curious. Tommy stood at her side, clutching her hand, staring up at Caleb as though the man were some giant out of legend. She swallowed hard. "I do." The words felt unreal. Like stepping off a cliff and hoping the ground would rise to meet her. The preacher cleared his throat. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I pronounce you husband and wife. God help you both." The crowd chuckled. A few men cheered. One ranch hand muttered, "Hell just froze." Caleb slipped the ring back onto Eliza's finger. It was heavier now, as though carrying the weight of both their losses. Their hands brushed, rough against delicate, strangers bound in a vow neither had expected that morning. By the time they reached the Double R Ranch, the sun was a red coin sinking behind jagged mesas. The ranch stretched wide across the plains, fences, corrals, cattle lowing in the distance, bunkhouses scattered near the big main house. The ranch hands were gathered out front, hats in hand, gawking like schoolboys at their boss bringing home a wife. One, a wiry man named Hank, whistled low. "Boss, you been keepin' secrets?" Caleb dismounted and helped Eliza down. Her son clung to her, eyes wide at the sheer size of the place. "No secrets," Caleb said curtly. "This is your new mistress. You'll treat her with the same respect you treat me, or you'll find work elsewhere." The men straightened quick, muttering, "Yes, sir." Inside, the house was large but cold. Heavy oak furniture. A stone fireplace. Shelves lined with books no one had touched in years. Eliza's footsteps echoed as she walked through, her heart tightening at the emptiness of it. It wasn't a home. It was a fortress. At supper, Caleb sat at the head of the long table. Eliza and Tommy sat to his right. The ranch cook, a gruff woman named Martha, served stew and bread. The silence was thick until Tommy, spoon in hand, blurted out, "So are you my pa now?" Eliza nearly dropped her spoon. Caleb froze. The ranch hands, seated further down the table, smothered their laughter. Caleb cleared his throat. "Something like that." Tommy grinned and dug into his stew as though that settled it. Eliza, however, couldn't eat. Her mind raced. What had she done? She had agreed to a marriage born not of love but of survival. She sat beside a man whose eyes held both pain and mystery, a man who commanded men and land like a general. And now, somehow, he was hers. That night, after Tommy was put to bed in a small room down the hall, Caleb poured 2 glasses of whiskey and handed one to Eliza. She didn't touch it. "Why me?" she asked bluntly. He sipped his own glass, staring into the fire. "Because you didn't bow your head when the whole town was staring. You had the grit to trade your last treasure for your boy. That kind of grit belongs here." Her laugh was bitter. "So this is about grit? About practicality? You don't even know if I can run a household. I don't need a housekeeper." His eyes finally met hers, steady and unflinching. "I need a wife." Her heart skipped. But she forced herself to hold his gaze. "And what if I can't love you?" The question hung sharp in the firelight. Caleb didn't flinch. "Then we'll make do with respect. That's more than most marriages have." Eliza swallowed, unsure whether to be comforted or frightened by his honesty. The next morning, whispers ran wild through Red Rock. Some said Caleb had finally gone mad with loneliness. Others said Eliza was clever, securing her future with a wealthy man. Some even whispered that Caleb had bought her outright, the same way he'd buy cattle. Eliza heard the whispers when she went to town for fabric. Women at the sewing circle smirked. One sneered, "Must be nice, going from pauper to queen overnight." Eliza forced a smile. "Queens don't scrub floors. I'll let you know if I start wearin' a crown." The women laughed, but not kindly. Back at the ranch, Caleb said little. He watched her move about the house, her son trailing behind. He noticed the way she straightened curtains, polished the table, even fixed a loose board on the porch with her own hands. She was not a woman who would sit idle, waiting for luxury to carry her. And slowly, though he tried to hide it, respect for her burned brighter in his chest. But peace never lasted long in the West. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, a lone rider appeared on the ridge. A man with a crooked hat, a scar down his cheek, and eyes like a wolf circling prey. Eliza froze when she saw him. Her face went pale. Caleb noticed. "You know him?" Her lips parted, but no words came. The rider tipped his hat slowly, deliberately, as though claiming a debt. Caleb's hand hovered near his gun. His jaw tightened. The air grew heavy, filled with the promise of storm. Because whatever past Eliza had tried to bury, had just come riding straight into their lives, the rider lingered on the ridge like a crow waiting for death. His horse stamped the dirt, its dark mane whipping in the evening wind, and the scar-faced man sat tall in the saddle, grinning down at the ranch house as if he already owned it. Eliza stood frozen on the porch, her hand clutching the railing so tight her knuckles turned white. Caleb stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of her without even thinking. His hand hovered near the grip of his revolver. "Who is he?" Caleb asked. His tone was calm, but his eyes never left the rider. Eliza's lips trembled. "His name's Silas Grant. He knew my husband." "Knew him how?" Her silence was answer enough. Silas tipped his hat, his grin widening, then tugged the reins and turned his horse back toward the hills. He rode away slow, deliberate, as though leaving a message behind. "I'll be back." That night, the house felt colder than usual. Caleb poured himself a whiskey but didn't drink it. He leaned against the mantel, his jaw tight. Eliza sat at the table, hands clasped, eyes downcast. Finally, he spoke. "You gonna tell me, or am I gonna have to drag it out of him with a bullet?" Her eyes snapped up, flashing anger. "Don't you dare." "Then talk." She swallowed hard. Silas was a gambler. A dangerous one. My husband owed him money before he died. More than we ever had. I thought it ended when the mine collapsed and," her voice broke. "But he found me again. He wants what I don't have." Caleb's gaze hardened. "He won't lay a hand on you. Or that boy." Eliza shook her head. "You don't know him. He doesn't forgive. He doesn't forget." Caleb straightened. "Neither do I." The next day Caleb rode into Red Rock. He found Silas in the saloon, leaning at the poker table, a cigar clenched between his teeth. The room went silent when Caleb pushed through the doors. "Rollins," Silas drawled, not even looking up from his cards. "Heard you married yourself a widow. Congratulations. Shame she comes with baggage." Caleb's boots struck hard against the floorboards as he approached. "You stay off my land." Silas chuckled, finally meeting his eyes. "Not your land I'm after. Just what's owed." Caleb's hand flexed near his holster. The whole saloon tensed. "Det died with her husband," Caleb said flatly. Silas leaned back, blowing a lazy smoke ring. "Then maybe I collect in another way." His grin was slow, cruel. "The widow's pretty enough. The boy looks spry. Maybe I take what's left." The word sliced through the room. Caleb's revolver was out before half the men blinked, the barrel leveled between Silas's eyes. Gasps. A chair scraped back. You so much as breathe wrong in their direction, Caleb growled, and you'll be buried in the desert before the buzzards smell you. Silas didn't flinch. He simply smiled, cold and knowing. Careful, Rollins. A man can't watch his land all hours of the night. Then, with deliberate slowness, he pushed his cards to the center of the table and stood. See you around, husband. 2 nights later, the ranch erupted in chaos. Flames roared from the hay barn, lighting the sky orange against the black desert night. Ranch hands shouted, racing with buckets. Cattle bellowed, panicked in their pens. Caleb was out the door with his gun before he'd even pulled his boots on. Eliza clutched Tommy to her chest, fear wide in her eyes. Stay inside. Caleb barked. But as he sprinted toward the flames, gunshots cracked through the dark. Silas's men, 2 of them, faces shadowed, fired from the ridge, keeping the ranch hands scrambling for cover. Caleb ducked behind a trough, returning fire with deadly precision. One of the men yelped and tumbled down the ridge. The other spurred his horse and vanished into the night. The fire raged. Caleb ran into the barn, choking on smoke, driving panicked horses out through the wide doors. And then, he heard it. Pa! The voice was high, terrified. Tommy. Caleb's blood ran cold. He spun to see the boy halfway inside, calling for him, trying to help. Tommy, get back. Caleb roared. But a burning beam cracked overhead, crashing down. Caleb lunged, sweeping the boy into his arms just as the roof gave way. He burst out into the night, coughing, his coat smoldering, Tommy clinging to his neck. The barn collapsed behind them in a roar of sparks. Eliza ran forward, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. She grabbed Tommy, holding him close, then looked at Caleb, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, smoke-blackened, staggering on his feet. Caleb, she cried, catching him as he stumbled. The world tilted. His knees buckled. He hit the ground hard, vision fading as the fire crackled and shouts rang all around. Caleb woke to pain and the faint smell of smoke. His eyes opened slowly to the sight of Eliza sitting beside the bed, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face pale but fierce. You're awake, she whispered. Relief broke through her voice, and she quickly brushed tears from her cheeks. He tried to sit up, but she pushed him back gently. Don't. You need rest. His voice was hoarse. The boy. Safe. Because of you. Their eyes met. Something unspoken burned between them. I told you, Caleb murmured, his voice rough. He's mine now. Both of you are. Eliza's breath caught. She reached for his hand, hesitated, then finally laced her fingers with his. I was so afraid, she admitted. Not of Silas. Of dragging you into this. I thought I'd ruin you. Caleb's grip tightened weakly. I've been ruined. 3 years without a soul in this house. You brought it back to life. Her tears spilled then, hot and unhidden. She leaned closer, pressing her forehead to his hand. In that fragile moment, the fortress around both their hearts cracked, but outside the quiet room, danger still lingered. At the edge of town, Silas sat in the saloon again, nursing a drink, the fire's glow reflected in his cruel smile. The rancher bleeds, he muttered. And a bleeding man's easier to kill. He raised his glass in a mock toast. To the widow. To the boy. To the empire I'll take from Rollins, piece by piece. And as the piano stumbled through a tune, the outlaw's laughter carried into the night, a promise that the storm was far from over. For days the Double R Ranch carried the smell of smoke. Blackened ruins of the hay barn smoldered while ranch hands rebuilt fences and soothed skittish cattle. Life carried on, but with a tension that never eased. Inside the big house, Caleb Rawlins fought restlessness. His forehead was bandaged, his ribs ached from hauling beams in the fire, and Martha the cook fussed over him like a hawk. "You ain't half as tough as you think," she scolded, setting a steaming bowl of broth beside him. Caleb gave her a thin smile. "I've lived through worse." Eliza sat nearby, mending Tommy's torn shirt. She didn't look up when she spoke. "That doesn't mean you have to keep testing fate." Caleb's gaze lingered on her, the needle moving quick and steady in her hands, the way she pushed through weariness without complaint. She'd spent the last 3 nights tending him, calming Tommy's nightmares, and still managing the ranch's endless chores. Finally, he said quietly, "You should have left me, Eliza. Taken the boy and run when you had the chance." Her head snapped up, eyes blazing. "And go where? Back to hunger? To trading rings for bread? I'd rather face Silas and his devils 100 times than live like that again. Don't you dare suggest leaving. Not after you saved my boy's life." Her words hung between them, fierce and trembling. Caleb felt something stir deep in his chest, something he hadn't let himself feel since his first wife's death. Hope, however, had little time to grow. On the 4th night after the fire, the ranch dogs barked wildly. Hooves thundered in the dark. Caleb was on his feet before Martha could stop him. He strapped on his gun belt, wincing with pain, and stepped onto the porch. Across the yard, 3 riders emerged from the night, Silas and 2 hired guns. Lantern light gleamed on their rifles. "Evenin', Rawlins," Silas called, voice mocking. "Heard you've been playin' house. Thought I'd drop by and pay my respects." Eliza appeared behind Caleb, her face pale but steady. Tommy clung to her skirt. "Get inside," Caleb murmured without turning. "No," she said firmly. "If you stand, I stand." Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Silas dismounted, swaggering forward with the easy menace of a man who'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to kill again. His men spread out, rifles gleaming in the moonlight. "You should have just paid the debt," Silas sneered. "Would have saved us all some trouble." Caleb's hand hovered near his holster. "You set fire to my barn. Endangered my people. My family. That's more than trouble. That's war." Silas chuckled darkly. "Family? She's just a desperate widow. And you," he spat into the dirt. "You're a fool who let her wrap you around her finger." Eliza stepped forward then, surprising them both. Her voice rang sharp in the night. "No, Silas. He's a man who stood where you never could. He saved my son when you would have let him burn. And I'll stand beside him until my last breath." Her defiance cut sharper than any blade. Caleb felt pride swell in his chest. Silas's grin faltered. His hand twitched toward his gun. "Then you'll die beside him." Time slowed. The air snapped with tension, the night holding its breath. Caleb's hand flashed to his holster. Silas's gun cleared leather almost the same second. The crack of revolvers split the silence. Caleb dropped to one knee, firing low and fast. Silas staggered back, a bullet ripping across his shoulder. His men fired wildly, one shot shattered a porch post inches from Eliza, another whined into the barn wall. Ranch hands spilled from the bunkhouse, guns blazing. Chaos erupted. Caleb rolled to cover, returning fire with deadly accuracy. One outlaw toppled from his saddle, screaming. The other turned tail, spurring his horse into the night. But Silas remained. Bloodied, furious, he charged forward, revolver raised. His eyes were wild, fixed not on Caleb now, but on Eliza. "No!" Caleb roared, throwing himself into the open. Their guns fired at the same instant. Silas jerked, a bullet tearing through his chest. His shot went wide, splintering wood inches from Eliza's head. He staggered, eyes wide with disbelief, before crashing into the dirt. The yard fell silent but for the ragged breaths of men and the distant howl of a coyote. Eliza rushed forward, clutching Caleb's arm. He was panting, smoke rising from his revolver, but unhurt this time. Silas lay in the dust, his cruel grin finally gone. His last words rasped into the night, "She'll ruin you." Then he was still, the body was buried in an unmarked grave outside town. No one mourned. His men vanished, scattering like shadows. Red Rock returned to its usual whispers, though now the story was of how Caleb Rollins stood with his new wife against an outlaw's wrath. At the ranch, life slowly steadied. A new barn was raised. Cattle calmed. Tommy laughed again, chasing ranch dogs across the yard. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the plains gold, Eliza found Caleb on the porch, staring out at the horizon with that same faraway look he always carried. She stepped beside him, quiet for a long moment. "Then, you risked your life for us." He shook his head. "It weren't risk. It was choice." Her throat tightened. "Why? Why me? You could have had any woman. Any rancher's daughter. Why a widow with nothing?" Caleb turned to her then, eyes softening in the glow of dusk. "Because when I saw you lay that ring on the counter, I saw a woman ready to give up her last piece of love for her child. That strength I've never seen before. And I knew right then, I wasn't looking at a burden. I was looking at the only chance I'd ever get to feel alive again." Tears blurred her eyes. She pressed a hand to his chest, over the steady beat of his heart. "I don't know if I'll ever be what you lost," she whispered. His hand covered hers. "You don't have to be. You're what I found." For the first time since the vows, their lips met. It wasn't the desperate kiss of strangers bound by circumstance, it was slow, certain, sealing a bond forged in fire, danger, and defiance. Weeks later, the ranch thrived again. The town still gossiped, but less cruelly now. Some even tipped their hats to Eliza when she walked past. Tommy followed Caleb everywhere, mimicking his stride, calling him Pa without hesitation. Caleb pretended to scowl when the hands teased him about it, but inside his heart swelled. At night, in the quiet house that no longer felt empty, Caleb sometimes lay awake, listening to the soft breaths of the woman beside him and the distant rustle of the plains. He thought of what he'd lost, but more importantly, of what he'd gained. One evening, he stood on the porch with Eliza, watching the sun sink into the red earth. His arms slipped around her waist, hers around his. Sometimes love came dressed in roses and soft songs. But out here, in the wild and dusty West, love had come in the form of a widow trading her ring for bread, and a cowboy who dared to choose her. Caleb's voice, low and steady, carries as though to the audience themselves. Out here, you learn quick, life don't hand you what you want. It hands you what you need. And sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is take a chance on love, even when it don't make sense. The screen fades to the horizon, dust glowing gold in the setting sun. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.